They thought I wouldn't show up. Thought shame would keep me away. For an hour, I stared at the invitation lying on my steel desk, as if it didn't know the weight it carried. A white envelope with pressed edges, my full name and title written boldly across it. Lieutenant General Zoe Ross. Whoever wrote it must have used a list, unaware that to this family, I hadn't been Zoe in years. The seal on the back was still intact, but I already knew what was inside. Rumors had reached me in scraps. Emails redirected through my aide, random comments from former classmates. But until that moment, none of it felt real. Laura was getting married. And not just married. She was marrying Major Andrew Walker. The irony was surgical in precision, 6 years. That's how long it had been since my mother's voice last crossed a border to reach me. No birthday wishes. No condolences when I nearly lost my hearing after my second deployment. Just silence. And now this, an elegant little jab to the ribs, signed not with warmth or love, but a single cold phrase written in familiar handwriting. Behave yourself. That day on the military base in San Diego was unusually quiet. Outside my apartment windows, the wind bent the flagpole, making it creak defiantly. Inside was the usual sterile order I had built my life around. Steel bed, a line of pressed uniforms, a locked chest no one dared to touch. I turned the invitation over in my hands as if it might change shape. A sharp double knock on the door. Colonel Simon Park. He entered without waiting for permission. "General," he said, eyeing the envelope. I heard. Of course he had. Colonel Park had radar ears and the patience of a saint. He sat down uninvited. We rarely discussed personal matters, but he'd known me since I was a stubborn young captain with trust issues. "You going?" he asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the envelope across the desk. He picked it up, squinted at the golden letters, and exhaled through his nose. "Walker," he muttered. "That the guy you pulled out of the crater in Iraq?" "That's the one." My voice was flat. Colonel Park leaned back in his chair. "You saved his life, and now he's marrying your sister." The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was familiar, part of my life, and more meaningful than words. "You think I should go?" I finally asked. He studied me a second. "Depends. Going to fight ghosts or bury one?" I laughed. Not the kind that brings relief, but the kind that recognizes an old scar. Maybe just to watch one of them burn. He didn't smile. "Then go. But don't wear your stars like armor. Wear them like memory. Let them see who you became without them." His words stayed with me long after he left. I placed the invitation back on the table and walked to the narrow window overlooking the drill square. Recruits were training below, eager, noisy, clueless. For a moment I envied them. I opened my closet and took out my dress uniform, the one I hadn't worn since a funeral where I wasn't allowed to speak. I laid it out on the bed, smoothing the sleeves like old wounds. That day came back with unexpected sharpness. My father was buried with full military honors, band 21-gun salute, but no seat for me in the front row. My mother sat between Laura and Uncle Jim, her mouth set in that sharp, bitter line. When I approached, she didn't even lift her head. Laura gave me a brief, unreadable glance and turned away, as if I were just an awkwardly placed uniform. I stood through the ceremony until Vera Ross, a cousin, touched my arm and whispered, "You shouldn't have come in uniform. Looks like you're trying to outshine the family." Family? I remembered not replying, just turned and walked away, and never looked back. Now, 6 years and 2 continents later, I held an invitation wrapped in reconciliation disguised as obligation. It wasn't the marriage that stung. It was Andrew Walker, the man who once whispered to me, "I owe you my life," while bleeding out in the desert. And now he was marrying the same woman who had once told me, on record, that I was a disgrace to the Ross family. I remembered that night in Iraq. The explosion, the dust, twisted metal. Andrew's leg nearly torn off. I crawled through open ground with blood in my mouth and shrapnel in my shoulder. The scar is still there. I sat down and opened my laptop. Flight schedule. Washington, D.C. 1 red-eye flight. Quiet. Anonymous. I told no one at the base. The confirmation email landed in my inbox 30 seconds later. I wasn't going to be welcomed. I was going to be seen. The plane landed at Dulles 20 minutes early. The airport smelled of antiseptic and wax. I passed through customs easily. My military ID worked like a key. As I stepped into the arrival hall, my phone buzzed, unknown number. Out of stubbornness, I nearly let it ring, but curiosity won. Speaking. My voice was calm, unreadable. Well, you really came. It was Laura. Her voice hadn't changed. Same melodic sweetness covering a steel spine. She had a gift for compliments that sounded like accusations. I didn't say I came to celebrate, I replied, already walking toward the escalator. You didn't say anything for 6 years, she chirped too brightly. So this is progress. No apology. Not even a hint of hesitation. I came because I was invited, I said. Right. Because Mom guilt-tripped you. I said nothing. Pause. Then she added with fake cheer. Well, Andrew can't wait to see you. You two always had such chemistry. I stopped on the moving walkway. That's not funny. I'm not joking, she said. But I heard the smile in her voice, the same one she wore at school dances when she told teachers I was just going through a phase. The same innocent mask hiding sharpened claws. That all? I asked. Just wanted to make sure you don't show up in full dress uniform. It's not festive. I ended the call without replying. Outside the car window, early spring painted Virginia in soft greens. The road to Chevy Chase curved through suburbs blooming with apple and cherry blossoms. Clean streets, perfect sidewalks. Everything looked like a postcard sent to prove that life was flawless. I didn't take the highway. Let the car wander through back roads I once biked as little Zoe, when scraped knees and bruised pride were the worst of my injuries. As I turned onto the cul-de-sac where my mother's house stood, I spotted Mrs. Anderson, the nosy neighbor with the ever-trimmed hydrangeas. She was watering her garden. Noticing the car, she squinted. Zoe, she called. I stepped out, adjusting the bag on my shoulder. Hello, Mrs. Anderson. She blinked. My goodness, you're still in the military? I smiled without showing teeth. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly, eyes drifting over my insignia, my posture, my silence. I figured you left. After everything. Some of us stay, I said, walking past her hedge without waiting for a reply. The Ross house looked exactly as I remembered. Too perfect, too polished, too falsely quiet. The shutters freshly painted, the driveway spotless. Only the porch light flickered slightly, as if even the electricity was holding its breath. I rang the doorbell. Pause, then footsteps. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Lemon polish, my mother's signature scent. Every surface in that house was so clean it gleamed disapproval. Vera stood in beige slacks and a blouse with pearl buttons. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes glanced over my plain clothes, but in her mind, she already saw me in uniform. Please don't ruin Laura's big day, was her greeting. The dining room hadn't changed. Not the chandelier, not the porcelain, not the tension humming beneath the polished mahogany table. 15 chairs, 14 people, one battlefield disguised as a family dinner. My seat was at the very end, next to the sideboard where kitchen heat washed over the back of your neck and conversations barely reached. I pulled the chair. It creaked. Laura raised her glass. To family, she declared. And to new beginnings, Vera added, shooting a look that wasn't at me but through me. No mention of me. No introduction. No Zoe's back. Just an empty space where recognition should have been. The retired colonel sitting next to Vera, Orloff I think, frowned when our eyes met. Familiar face, he said under his breath. Vera leaned toward him immediately. Oh, that's Zoe. She served overseas. In security matters. The words landed like a slap disguised as small talk. Security logistics, Laura added, guarding the door with a smile. Firm. Assured. A few polite laughs drifted around the table. My silence was no longer submission, but in this house, among these people, silence always felt like a threat. Orloff tilted his head again. Wait a minute. Iraq? 2002. I didn't blink. Yes, sir. That's correct. He opened his mouth to say more but stopped. His eyes flicked to Vera. She gave the faintest shake of her head. He looked back at his plate. No one asked me a single question. Finally, Laura turned to me, her eyes gleaming with the pleasure this performance gave her. So how long are you staying, Zoe? Or will they call you back any moment to guard some missile silo? A few chuckles rippled down the table. I took a sip of water. Let it settle. Then I set the glass down slowly. The people I protect, I said evenly, outrank everyone in this room. Silence. Not angry. Not loud. Just frozen. Even the chandelier seemed to hold its breath. No one laughed. For the first time, they didn't know where to place me, and that terrified them. My name wasn't on the seating chart. Nor my rank. Near the entrance of the reception hall stood a dainty easel holding a printed layout on pearly white cardstock. Table by table. Name by name. My eyes skimmed past cousins and their plus ones, past old neighbors, nothing. No Zoe. No General Ross. Just silence in floral font. I stood there too long, watching guests stroll past exchanging pleasantries. A woman in lavender heels jabbed her finger at the chart. Oh, table 8 by the stage. She squealed to her partner. Right up close. I looked again. Table 12. Back corner. By the emergency exit. Of course. Vera had mentioned it that morning offhandedly as she handed me a plate of fruit I hadn't asked for. You'll be at table 12. Out of sight for everyone's sake. She hadn't waited for a response. And here I was. In full dress blues, metal ribbons aligned. Hair arranged with military precision. Standing like a statue in the hall, trying not to calculate how deliberately they placed me on the fringe. The hall was beautiful. I'll give them that. White lilies framed the head table. Soft violin melodies drifted from the speakers. Everything was choreographed. Controlled. And I was not part of the choreography. Vera appeared beside me, rustling in beige silk, radiating forced warmth. You look wonderful, she said, eyeing my medals like they might stain the air. Just remember, no press. If anyone asks what you do, just say logistics. I stared at her. I command brigades. She tilted her head slightly. And here you're a guest. Before I could respond, a photographer darted past, shutter clicking. He paused, looked me over, then turned away to capture a laughing Laura with her bridesmaids. The lens didn't swing back to me. The ceremony was short, efficient. Laura stood in white, as if her purity had never been questioned. Andrew stood beside her, flawless, composed, unreadable. He glanced once over the crowd. His eyes landed on me. No smile. No nod. Just a look, and then he turned away. No mention of the woman who dragged his bleeding body off a minefield. That clearly wasn't in their fairy tale script. When the priest asked for close family to come forward for the blessing, I started to rise, more reflex than intention. But Vera's hand was suddenly there, light and smooth on my elbow, as if straightening a wrinkle in my coat. Let's not create confusion, she whispered. This is Laura's day. I looked down at her hand, then up at Andrew and Laura, kneeling inside their tight circle of family. I could have stepped forward. No one would have dared stop me. But that wasn't the point. The point was they truly believed I didn't belong. I sat down. At the banquet, my table was tucked behind a column, beside the staff entrance. The place card read in small print. Z. Ross, no title. The server skipped my glass while pouring wine. When I called him over, he checked his list and said, "Oh, you're on the non-drinkers list." I didn't correct him. Across the hall, Laura flitted like a candle flame, posing for photos, twirling in her gown, kissing cheeks. Andrew kept one hand on her lower back, a glass in the other. He never looked my way again. At one point, a woman leaned over and asked if I worked security for the venue. Yes, I replied. Then came the toasts. Vera raised her glass. To love and loyalty, two things this family holds above all. Polite chuckles followed. And then it came. Laura took the mic. Who would have thought? She began sweetly, glancing around. Even my older sister showed up today, all the way from wherever she's stationed now. She paused and tilted slightly toward my table. She guards doors for the powerful, she smirked. Let's hear it for the silent sentinel in our lives. Laughter. A few claps. From her seat, Vera added, voice clear and commanding. She's the disgrace of this family, but at least she showed up on time. There it was. The room tipped with laughter. I stood, not fast, not in anger, but slowly. Inevitably, Andrew was already looking at me. He didn't laugh, didn't smile, just watched, like you watch a storm gather over calm water. Laura's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then she raised the mic again. Oh, come on, she laughed. It's just a joke. Lighten up, Zoe. You've always taken everything so seriously. And then Andrew moved. One step forward. Steady. Decisive. No hesitation. The chatter stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze in midair. Every camera lens swiveled, capturing a moment not written in the script. He walked across the hall past former commanders, academy friends, distant relatives in custom-tailored suits. And every step echoed. He stopped one pace in front of me. Then in the thunderous silence of the banquet hall, he raised his hand. A sharp, precise, flawless military salute. A gesture not given to a sister or a friend or for the sake of a joke. Lieutenant General, Andrew's voice rang clear across the room without a microphone. I ask your forgiveness for my wife. He turned to face the hall, still holding his salute. This, he said, is Lieutenant General Zoe Rostova, my commanding officer. A collective gasp, not a whisper, but a sound pulled from every tuxedo like breath suddenly drained. I didn't move. Laura wobbled where she stood. The microphone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. She stumbled back, eyes wide, mouth parted, and collapsed into a chair. Vera stood abruptly, knocking over her champagne. Zoya, she began, but the word dissolved in breathless panic. And I didn't even blink. The hall held its breath like it had swallowed a live grenade. Silence clung to the walls, nestled in the pleats of linen tablecloths, settled in untouched glasses. The string quartet froze mid-note. Forks hovered. Guests blinked as if they'd forgotten how. I was still standing. So was Andrew. His salute was complete. Hand lowered, fingers steady, posture straight. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a plea. It was a truth, etched into the heart of that evening. Lieutenant General Zoe Rostova. My name hadn't been spoken aloud in that room for years, not with respect, not with weight, not at all. Vera finally found her voice. Her hand darted for a napkin, which slid from her lap and rustled to the floor. She didn't pick it up. Her eyes jumped from place to place, seeking an exit, a shadow, some kind of denial, but there was none. No one moved. And then one person did. From the second row, past the swan carved from ice, rose a man in a dark navy jacket. Colonel Orloff, retired, still standing like the officer he'd once been. The one who commanded the engineer battalion back when I was a young lieutenant with dirt under my nails and something to prove. He squared his shoulders and raised his right hand in a crisp, silent salute. The air thickened. Then a second rose, General Ivanov, who used to lecture at the academy. Then a third. A woman around 50 whose posture told her story better than any name. Army. Career. Then a fourth. 4 salutes. Not rehearsed, not staged. Just quiet recognition slicing through the polite fabric of the evening. Vera tried again. This isn't the time, she began, her voice trembling just beneath the surface tension. But no one turned toward her. Now every eye in the room was fixed on me. Not because I'd asked for it. Not because I'd demanded it. Because the atmosphere itself had been rewritten stitch by stitch. And every thread now led here. I felt it all. The weight of the moment. The discomfort. The shame. The reevaluation when people mentally whispered. Is this the woman Laura mocked? The one we laughed off? They were all rewriting their own memories, desperately trying to salvage the version of themselves who had chuckled 2 minutes earlier. Andrew stepped back, ceding the stage to me without a word. I didn't move. I didn't take the mic. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there. And that was enough to make them scorn. When my mother finally called my name, I barely recognized it. Zoya, she said softly, like testing how the word might sound. Can we talk? We sat in a hotel lounge, one designed for high-ranking guests who prefer whispers to crowds. The room was dressed in velvet shadows in the sterile quiet of serious money. A single lamp lit our table. The coffee between us had gone cold. She hadn't called me anything but you or your sister in over a decade. Now she reached for warmth she hadn't earned. I didn't correct her. I just waited. Vera adjusted her blouse. You certainly made an impact, she said with a taut smile. The press is buzzing and not all of it's flattering. I said nothing. We weren't prepared, Zoya. No one was. Not even your daughter, fainting like that, I asked coldly. Vera looked away. Laura has a sensitive nature. To reality, I said flatly. My voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. I didn't come for a fight, she sighed. I just thought, maybe you'd agreed to make a brief statement to the media. Just to clarify that we misunderstood your role. I blinked slowly. You want me to write a press release for your comfort? Not a lie. Just context. Her voice tightened with urgency. Our family's reputation. You weren't protecting the family, I said quietly but firmly. You were erasing your daughter. Silence dropped between us like dust on old furniture. She looked as if she were seeing the first crack in her perfect world. The next day, I met with Laura in a cafe. She tried to play the same card. It was just a joke, Soya. Honestly, I didn't think. That's the problem, I interrupted. You never think. You script. I pulled a sheet of paper from my folder. Official stationery, Department of Defense Public Relations. Anonymous report, I said. Since 7 years ago. Accusing me of falsifying records from Chechnya. Her smile froze. I didn't write that. You did, I replied calmly. You saw it. I laid down the second sheet. Linguistic analysis. 96% match. She went silent. You sent it 2 months before I was passed over for my first promotion to Major General. My file sat untouched for almost a year. I was angry, she whispered. You were always the star. Dad's pride. They always compared us. So you tried to bury me alive. She had no reply. Later, I met Andrew on the rooftop bar. I never told Laura what you did, he said, staring at Moscow's lights. I knew she'd weaponize it. Turn it into a fable about how her husband almost died and she was the one who stood tall. Your story deserved better. Then why did you marry her? He was quiet for a long time. Because it was easy. The Rostov family offered a life that felt clean. Ordered. I was tired of brushing shoulders with death. I wanted safety. She's not safety. She's strategy. He smiled bitterly. Yeah. I realized that about a week after the engagement. Last night, I stood because if I hadn't, I would have become one of them. At the airport, reporters surrounded me. And instead of walking past, I stepped up to the empty podium. I know why you're here, I began. You want a headline. But I'm not the failure of my family. I'm the silence they made visible. For years, I served my country while being erased from my own story. Today, I'm launching the Resilience Fund, a resource for service members whose careers have been derailed by personal betrayal. In the Defense Ministry Hall, before rows of generals and analysts, I laid out my plan. We train people to survive war, I concluded. It's time we teach the system how to protect them in peace. An elderly admiral scoffed, but the deputy minister folded his hands and said evenly, We'll fund it. That was enough. That was everything. Years later, I stood once more at the threshold of the Rostov house. It felt smaller now. And inside, it smelled like emptiness. Vera came to the door, no pearls, no lipstick. Her sharpness had faded. I didn't know how to protect you, she finally said. Not without erasing you. You were loud. In a world that punished loud women. I wasn't loud, I replied. I was visible. There's a difference. Don't rewrite my story when I'm gone. If they ask why I didn't come back, don't say I was distant. Tell them the truth. You made your choice. And I made mine. I didn't hug her. That too was a choice. Now I live in a small cottage on the coast of Crimea. In the mornings I paint. Color falls on canvas where shadows used to be. I no longer wear the uniform. The old army phone I keep out of habit lies in a drawer with medals I never display. Not long ago, a message came from Semyon Pavlovich. An offer to head the ethics commission at General Staff. I listened, then deleted it. There is a special freedom in knowing. You don't know when your story anymore. I finished writing the last line in my journal. I walked alone, but I was not lost. Closing it, I stepped onto the terrace. The wind played in my hair. Below, the endless sea stretched wide. No applause. No headlines. Only the sound of the tide. The breath of a woman who once disappeared, and learned to return. Not to them, but to herself. The family that once disowned her now speaks her name with caution. Not from shame, but from awe. Justice may come late, but when it finally speaks, it echoes with impossible power.